All right, let's dive in today. And we're going deep into club game. We've got this fascinating series of audio tracks to unpack here. Like, peeking behind the curtain of this whole secret society with its own, like, rules and hierarchies and
Yeah,
even,
its own currency, really.
yeah, it's wild. So we'll be, looking into the psychology of how people interact in clubs, what actually works, and this surprising link between, like, getting how the club actually makes money and finding success, socially in that environment.
Yeah, it's really interesting how clubs are kind of like these mini societies. You see all these like amplified social dynamics. It makes all those unspoken rules and motivations so much more obvious.
Right, right. One of the things that really jumped out from the source material was this paradox about, clubs are where women often look their absolute best,
Yeah,
but it's also like the hardest place to approach them.
Mm.
It's this weird mix of being super attractive, but also like totally untouchable.
right.
So why is that?
Well, the source kind of points to a bunch of things. For guys, the club is just this like arena of competition. They actually call it the World Series of Seduction.
Wow.
And then for women, they're in their own like battle for social status, which plays a huge role in why they can be so guarded.
So it's like everybody's playing a game,
Hmm.
but with completely different goals. You have this whole lottery mentality that the source talks about,
Yeah.
where women see the club as a place where the chances of hitting it big are slim, but they're still willing to play because that potential reward is so enticing. That really stuck with me. Is that like a real thing?
Oh, absolutely. You can see it in, how some women approach going to clubs. There's this underlying hope of meeting someone, exceptional, like a celebrity or someone really wealthy. Even if the odds are super low, it's like, playing the lottery where that potential payout outweighs
Yeah.
the risk of not winning at all.
I see, I see. So how does that, that whole lottery mentality, how does that affect how guys approach women at clubs?
It makes things a lot more complex. While cold approaching can be a good skill in lots of social situations, the club environment throws in some unique challenges. That lottery mindset makes women a lot more selective and way less approachable.
Yeah, that makes sense. It reminds me of that story from the source about the guy who made out with 4 women in one night, but still ended up going home alone.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how just, initial attraction doesn't equal success in this environment. Approaching a woman in a club, it takes a much more nuanced approach, like keeping your opener short, impactful, being physically tactile but not, creepy, and making those interactions brief and memorable.
Oh, okay. So it's almost like you're sparking their interest and then moving on,
Yeah.
creating this sense of mystery and intrigue.
Exactly. You want to leave them wanting more. And this is where social proof comes in. Aligning yourself with the right people can really boost your perceived value.
Ah, so it's not just about your own game then. It's about who you're seen with too. The source mentions club promoters as being these key players in the whole social hierarchy thing. Is that because they're the ones with the keys to like the VIP areas and all that?
It's more than just access to exclusive spots. Promoters are like connectors in the club's social ecosystem. Becoming friends with one can open up a whole network of people,
Hmm.
including those high status individuals.
I see, I see. The source actually gives this whole strategy for befriending a promoter, understanding what they need, like bringing in a crowd and attracting women. That seems like a good place to start.
Oh, absolutely. Demonstrating that you bring value by consistently bringing people to the club and cultivating familiarity can really make you an asset in their eyes.
It's interesting how the source frames it as like a mutually beneficial thing. You're
Yeah.
helping the promoter do their thing, but at the same time, you're raising your own social standing in the club. And the impact of social proof can be like crazy. The source tells this story where a guy was just standing next to this high status musician,
Yeah.
and out of nowhere, this woman just walks up to him, completely unprompted.
Wow.
It just shows you how much your perceived social value can change just by who you're associated with.
It's powerful stuff. And that's just the beginning. As you navigate the social landscape, you'll run into different types of guys. The source breaks them down into categories like high status guys, players, and then the ones considered low status or average. Each one brings its own dynamic you got to learn to navigate.
Okay, now that's got me intrigued. So how do you approach each of these types, and how can that impact your success in the club?
So with the high status guys, it's interesting. The source actually argues that while they're attractive to women, They often lack like real game. They've never really had to develop those skills, you know?
Ah.
Their status and their looks have always done the work for them.
So they're more like a social ornament than actual competition.
That's a great way to put it. And a lot of women, savvy women, they use this to their advantage. They turn these high status guys into what the source calls orbiters. They, provide attention and validation, but rarely anything more.
Making them prime targets for, what was it, picking off chicks? They
Exactly.
benefit from their social capital without having to compete with their, let's just say, their underdeveloped game.
Right, right. It's like a social proof hack.
Mhm.
The source even tells the story about a guy who was just hanging out with his musician friend, and suddenly this beautiful woman approaches him, completely bypassing the musician.
Wow, just because he was associated with someone with that high status aura.
Exactly. It shows the power of proximity and perceived value. But then there are the other types of guys to watch out for, the players, the guys who are actually good at this whole game.
Right, the players.
Oh,
What's the best way to deal with those guys?
the source is pretty straightforward on this one. Avoid them, unless you're a woman, of course. Players are generally focused on their own pursuits. They're not really interested in befriending other guys.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what if a player is also like high status?
Yeah.
Is there a way to leverage that connection without becoming their wingman?
That's a good question. The source doesn't really get into specifics on that one, but I think it's about finding a balance. You can be friendly, associate with them to a certain extent, but don't get caught in their gravitational pull.
So high status guys, use them to your advantage. Players, observe and learn from a distance. What about the average guys then? The ones who aren't necessarily high status or players,
Yeah.
how do you navigate those interactions?
The source suggests maintaining some distance, at least at first. It's about perception. You don't want to blend in with the crowd. You want to stand out as someone who belongs in a higher social tier.
So strategic positioning is key. Don't get lost in the sea of average. Okay, now let's go back to befriending promoters, which we talked about earlier. Source seems to put a lot of emphasis on this. Is finding a promoter really that crucial to having success in the club?
It's definitely a significant advantage. Promoters, especially the well-connected ones, can be your gateway to a whole social network within the club.
And you mentioned before that showing up with women is a good way to show a promoter your value.
Oh, absolutely. Women are like the lifeblood of the club. They attract men who then spend money, which ultimately benefits the promoter. The source even compares showing up with a few women to walking in with thousands of dollars.
Whoa, okay, that's quite a visual. But once you're on the promoter's radar, how do you actually solidify your position in that social circle?
Consistency is key. Show up regularly, be a positive presence, and keep bringing value to the group. The source really emphasizes building those genuine connections with the people in that circle.
So it's not just about showing face, it's about establishing yourself as someone who contributes to the group dynamic.
Exactly. And remember, the social landscape of the club, it's always changing. New
Mhm.
people come in, others fade away. Adaptability is crucial.
So you've got your promoter connection, you're surrounded by high status people, you're vibing with the women. What's the next step? How do you actually like escalate things and maybe leave the club with someone?
Well, the source really emphasizes physical game over verbal game in the club environment. Think dancing, playful touch, even little teasing. It's about creating that physical connection that cuts through all the noise and chaos of the club.
So less about witty banter and more about establishing a physical rapport.
Exactly. The club setting is already so physically charged, so you're just leveraging that energy. And it's not just about attraction. Physical touch can also help a woman regulate her emotional state in such a stimulating environment.
Right, that makes sense. It's about creating a sense of comfort and connection amidst all the chaos.
Exactly. And once you've built that physical connection, the next step is all about timing and logistics. Recognizing when to make your move, how to separate her from the group, and creating that opportunity for things to progress further.
Sounds like a delicate dance. But what about the women who are part of those tight-knit peer groups? The source mentions those can be uh, tricky to navigate.
Oh, absolutely. Those groups have their own internal dynamics, their own like unspoken rules and social contracts. The source uses the example of a woman seemingly cock-blocking her friend who was leaving with a really attractive guy. But they suggest it wasn't actually about jealousy. It was about protecting the social standing of the group.
So if her friend has a bad experience, it reflects poorly on the whole group.
Precisely. It's a fascinating example of how social dynamics play out, even in seemingly casual environments. So when approaching women within these groups, you have to be extra careful and attuned to those nuances.
So how do you recommend approaching women in these types of groups? Do you need to get the approval of the whole group before making a move? Yeah.
The source suggests starting with safe, fun interactions with the whole group, and then gradually escalating as you build rapport and establish yourself as a non-threatening presence.
So it's about building trust and familiarity before making any direct moves on a specific woman within the group.
Exactly. You want to be seen as someone who adds value to the group dynamic, not someone who disrupts it. And this is where understanding the club's ecosystem as a whole, from the promoters to the different types of guys and the dynamics of peer groups, it can give you a significant advantage.
It's like having a blueprint for navigating this whole complex social landscape. So you're not just relying on luck or charm, you're approaching it strategically. But with all this focus on the club environment, can these connections ever translate into something more meaningful outside the club?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of people wonder about that with the club scene. Can these interactions actually turn into something real outside of that environment, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
The source acknowledges that it can be tough. You know, club interactions, they often happen in this very specific context. It's late, the music's blasting, everybody's, feeling good. That energy can create a sense of connection that feels really intense in the moment, but it doesn't always translate to the outside world.
So how do you bridge that gap then
Yeah.
between the club world and the real world? Is it even possible?
The source suggests that maintaining those connections outside the club is key. Using platforms like MySpace or whatever the modern equivalent is, to stay in touch and actually build on those initial interactions, that can be really helpful.
So it's about taking those fleeting moments and turning them into something more, I guess. But let's be real, the club scene isn't exactly known for fostering like deep, meaningful relationships. Is the source being like overly optimistic about this?
I wouldn't say optimistic, but they do emphasize that it's not impossible. It just requires a shift in mindset and approach. Recognizing that even amidst the fleeting nature of club interactions, genuine connections can still, form.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm curious though, beyond just the romantic aspect of it all, are there other benefits to building those connections?
Absolutely. The social network you build in the club can extend way beyond just romantic interests. It can open doors to friendships, professional opportunities, just a wider social circle overall.
So it's about seeing the club as more than just a place to find a date. It's a whole social ecosystem with its own set of rules and opportunities.
Exactly. And the more you understand those rules, the better equipped you'll be to navigate that ecosystem successfully. Whether your goal is to find a romantic partner, expand your social circle, or just have a good time.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. We've explored the psychology behind club interactions. We learned about social proof and understanding how the club actually makes money. We even got some tactical advice on navigating that whole social scene.
It is fascinating how something that seems as simple as going to a club can reveal so much about human behavior and social dynamics.
It's like holding up a mirror to society,
Yeah,
just with a much better soundtrack.
I like that. Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listener walks away with today?
I think the most important thing is to approach the club with a sense of awareness and a strategic mindset. Understand the rules of the game, be mindful of the social dynamics at play, and most importantly, have fun with it.
Well said. And remember, listeners, even though we've covered a lot today, this is really just the beginning. The best way to truly understand club game is to experience it for yourself, armed with the knowledge and insights we've talked about today.
Yeah, go out there, observe, interact, see what you discover.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of club game. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the human experience.
Until then, stay curious.